The light catches the dust motes dancing in the air above the keyboard, each tiny particle a universe I never noticed before. My fingers hover, stained slightly with ink from hours spent hunched over paperwork that wasn't mine. The screen glows, a cold, clinical blue, illuminating words that feel like shards of glass in my gut. Account numbers, routing information, a payment description, tuition, semester 3, and a name. Her name, not mine, never mine. It's a slow burn, this realization, creeping from my fingertips up my arms, settling like lead in my chest. The silence in the house is deafening, a vacuum where trust used to live. I trace the numbers with my index finger, cold against the warm plastic. They add up. They always add up. This isn't a mistake. This isn't a misunderstanding. This is deliberate. This is calculated. This is betrayal, packaged neatly in a spreadsheet. The breath I'm holding feels like it might crack my ribs. The world outside keeps turning oblivious. But in here, everything has stopped. Or maybe everything has just begun. Let me know where you're watching from and what time it is. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. It helps me more than you know. We had a life that felt solid, like a well-built house with deep foundations. 10 years. That's a decade measured in shared meals, inside jokes, quiet mornings with coffee, predictable evenings on the couch. He worked hard. I worked hard. We talked about future plans, about renovating the kitchen, maybe traveling when the time was right. It wasn't a fairy tale. Nothing was perfect, but it was ours. It felt safe. He was my constant, my anchor, the person I told everything to, the one whose presence was as familiar and necessary as the air I breathed. I saw the small things, of course. The late nights at the office that stretched later. The phone calls taken in hushed tones on the patio. The way he sometimes seemed miles away even when he was sitting right next to me. But I rationalized it. Stress from work. Pressure to perform. The usual hum of a busy life. Marriage is compromise, I told myself. Marriage is patience. Marriage is giving each other space. I thought I was being understanding. I thought I was being a good wife. I was building our life, brick by brick, on what I believed was solid ground. The ground was sand. And he was the tide, slowly, deliberately, washing it all away, grain by grain, right under my feet. I was humming along, painting a wall perhaps, while he was busy diverting the river that fed our life into some other, secret channel. The signs were there, tiny little flags waving in the wind, but I was too busy, too trusting, too comfortable to see them for what they were. I saw them as quirks, not cracks. As distractions, not diversions. He developed new habits. A sudden interest in a specific part of town he'd never cared for before. A change in his grooming habits that seemed excessive. A new watch. Small things. Trivial things in isolation. But strung together? A necklace of lies, slowly tightening around my throat. He was a good liar. He was so good I never suspected. Not really. Not in my gut. My gut was too full of dinner we'd shared, conversations we'd had, a shared history I thought was real. He could look me in the eye, talk about his day, ask about mine, and project an air of normal domesticity that was utterly convincing. It was like living with a stranger wearing my husband's face, reciting lines from a script I didn't know existed. The script called for a dutiful husband, a partner, a man committed to our shared future. The actor playing the part was off-script, starring in a different production entirely, one I was unknowingly funding. And the co-star was someone I didn't know. Someone who was being built up, brick by brick, with the resources meant for us. For our house. For our travel fund. For our future. It was a slow poisoning of the well, so gradual I didn't taste the bitterness until it was too late. Until the water was undrinkable. Until the trust was irrevocably broken. Until the house I thought we'd built together was revealed as nothing more than a flimsy facade, hiding a secret construction site where he was building something else entirely, for someone else. The notification blinked on his laptop screen. He'd left it open, something he never did. A careless oversight. A thread left dangling. Curiosity, the quiet, insistent kind that you tell yourself is harmless, tugged at me. Just a quick glance. A check of the weather, maybe, before I shut it down for him. But it wasn't the weather app that was open. It was his online banking portal. And there, highlighted by the cursor he'd forgotten to move, was the transfer. Large sum. Recurring. Labeled cryptically, but clearly enough for my heart to stop in my chest. Educational services, followed by an initial. An initial I didn't recognize. My hands trembled as I clicked back through the transaction history. It wasn't a one-off. It was monthly. For years. Stretching back. Years. The dates blurred. The amounts added up, an astronomical sum. Enough to pay for something significant. Something expensive. My mind raced, grasping at straws. A relative? A friend in trouble? He hadn't mentioned anything. He told me everything. Didn't he? I scrolled further, my breath catching in my throat. The recipient details weren't fully visible, but there was an address. And it wasn't local. And then another detail. A small, attached note on one of the older transfers. Something about good luck with your boards? Medical boards? The pieces slammed together with brutal force. Educational services. Boards. A large, ongoing sum. It clicked into place, a horrifying picture assembling itself before my eyes. He was funding someone's medical education. Someone he hadn't told me about. The blood drained from my face. Who? Why? A cold dread, unlike anything I'd ever felt, washed over me. It wasn't just money. It was secrecy. It was a life I didn't know he was living. The silence in the house pressed in on me. The air grew thin. This wasn't stress. This wasn't late nights at the office. This was something else entirely. Something fundamental. Something that threatened to shatter the very foundation I thought we stood on. My hands shook so violently I had to grip the edge of the desk. The numbers swam before my eyes, but the total remained fixed in my mind. A fortune. Gone. Not on our life, but on someone else's. Someone he cared about enough to invest in, deeply, secretly, over years. The initial on the transfer swam before my eyes. Who were you? Panic was a physical thing. It seized my chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to shatter the fragile peace of the house with the violence of my discovery. But something stopped me. A voice deep inside, cold and clear. Not yet. Confrontation would only give him a chance to lie, to twist, to minimize. I needed to know everything. I needed proof. Undeniable, irrefutable proof. The initial on the bank transfer. That address. I started there. Simple searches online. The address led to a building. A large, modern apartment complex in a city hours away. A city I knew he visited occasionally for business. My heart hammered against my ribs. Was this where he stayed? Was this who he stayed with? I searched the initial, combined with the city, looking for anything. Social media profiles, professional directories, news articles. Nothing immediately obvious connected to him. But then I found it. A professional profile on a medical website. Her name. The same initial. Her photo. Young. Beautiful. A doctor. A newly minted doctor, according to the profile. Graduation date, recent. Residency information. And a mention of where she'd gone to medical school. A prestigious, expensive institution. The dates aligned perfectly with the bank transfers. The realization hit me like a physical blow. He hadn't just funded her medical degree. He had funded her. Their relationship wasn't new. It had been going on for years. Throughout our marriage. While he was building our life, he was building hers too. And investing in her future. A future that clearly didn't include me. The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. It wasn't a fling. It was a parallel life. A parallel life meticulously funded with our money. The money I had helped earn, helped save, helped plan a future with him. The rage came then, hot and sharp, cutting through the icy fear. But underneath the rage was a deep, bone-weary sadness. The decade of my life. The love I had given. The trust. all of it a performance to him. A cover story for his real life, the one where he played benefactor to his mistress. I wanted to fall apart, to collapse on the floor and sob until there was nothing left. But that cold voice inside spoke again. Not yet. Falling apart wouldn't get me answers. It wouldn't get me justice. It wouldn't make him see what he had done. I had to be strong. I had to be smart. I had to gather more information. I had to understand the full extent of the deception. The initial discovery was just the crack in the facade. I needed to see the rotten structure underneath. Every transaction, every trip, every lie, every hushed phone call. I needed to piece it all together, not just for proof, but for my own sanity. To understand how I had been so blind, so naive. How the man I loved could be capable of such profound, sustained deceit. The pain was a constant ache, a dull throb behind my eyes, in my chest, in my very bones. Sleep offered no escape, only restless hours replaying every interaction, searching for clues I'd missed, signs I'd misinterpreted. Was that why he'd been distant? Was that why he'd flinched when I touched him? Was that why he'd stopped saying, "I love you" first? The questions gnawed at me, relentless. I felt like a detective in my own ruined life, sifting through the wreckage, trying to understand how the disaster had happened. Every memory felt tainted, every shared moment suspect. Was he thinking of her then? Was he comparing me to her? Was he resenting me for the life he was trapped in while he funded his escape with her? The thoughts were a poison stream, flowing through my mind, eroding everything good that had been there. This wasn't just infidelity. This was a calculated, long-term financial and emotional investment in another woman, hidden completely from me. It wasn't a mistake. It was a choice. A series of choices, made over years, that prioritized her and her future, over mine, over ours. The scale of it was breathtaking. A medical degree. The cost was astronomical. He hadn't just bought her gifts. He had bought her a career, a future, a life. Using our resources. The injustice of it burned hotter than the rage. This wasn't fair. This wasn't right. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that I couldn't let him get away with it. Not with the money. Not with the lies. Not with the life he was building on the ruins of mine. The more I dug, the uglier it got. I became a ghost in my own house, moving through the motions of our shared life while secretly sifting through the wreckage. I checked phone records, call logs filled with frequent calls to a number I didn't recognize, often late at night. Texts deleted before he came home. Credit card statements revealed purchases in that other city, hotels, restaurants, expensive gifts. Always separate from our joint account. He had set up a separate account years ago, claiming it was for investments he wanted to manage independently. I hadn't questioned it. Why would I? He was my husband. Trust was the bedrock. Now, I saw it for what it was, a secret fund, a clandestine pipeline to his other life. I hired a private investigator, a small, quiet woman named Elena with eyes that missed nothing. I told her I suspected financial impropriety, a hidden investment perhaps. I didn't mention the other woman yet. I wanted her to find the connections independently. And she did. She traced the account activity, confirmed the large, regular payments. She found property records, a small apartment bought in that city, in her name, but paid for with transfers from a separate account. Not just tuition. A home. He had set her up. Completely. It wasn't just funding her education. It was building her entire life. Elena also confirmed the affair.
Surveillance photo.
Bank records showing joint travel, weekends away, disguised as business trips. The evidence piled up, a mountain of proof, so high it was suffocating. Each piece of information was a fresh stab, a new layer of pain. The photos of them together, laughing, holding hands, felt like acid on my skin. The detailed financial records, showing the exact sums, the dates, the duration of the deception, were a cold, hard testament to the scale of his betrayal. It wasn't a moment of weakness. It was a sustained, calculated effort to deceive me and build a future with someone else, using our shared resources. The house, once my sanctuary, felt like a cage. Living under the same roof, sharing meals, exchanging pleasantries, while knowing the depth of his deceit was a form of torture. Every smile felt like a lie. Every touch felt tainted. I became adept at wearing a mask, acting normal, discussing our day, our plans, our mundane routines, while my mind was racing, processing the latest piece of evidence, building my case. The dry humor I'd always relied on became a shield, deflecting questions, hiding the turmoil inside. "Oh, late again? Must be a big project," I'd say, a little too brightly, knowing exactly why he was late, knowing who he was with, knowing whose future he was discussing, whose hand he was holding, while I sat alone in our house. The sadness was a constant companion, a heavy cloak wrapped around me, but it was hardening into something else. Something cold. Something sharp. Anger, yes, but not just blind rage. A focused, simmering anger. A determination. He thought he was so clever. Building his secret life, siphoning off our money, keeping me in the dark. He had underestimated me. He had mistaken my trust for naivety. My love for weakness. That was his biggest mistake. He had left a paper trail. He had left digital footprints. He had left a pathway to his lies, and I was following it, meticulously, patiently, gathering every piece of evidence. Elena's reports were detailed, clinical, and devastating. She provided bank statements, copies of deeds, travel itineraries, communication logs. The sheer volume of proof was overwhelming. He hadn't just cheated. He had systematically defrauded me. He had used marital assets, earned during our marriage, intended for our shared future, to fund his mistress's education and lifestyle. This wasn't just a moral failing. This was illegal. This was financial fraud. And that realization shifted something within me. This wasn't just about betrayal anymore. This was about justice, about reclaiming what was mine, about ensuring he couldn't just walk away from the consequences of his actions, and about making sure she didn't profit from her role in destroying my life. The idea solidified slowly, chillingly. He had built her up, used my life to build hers. What if I could tear hers down? What if the very thing he had invested so heavily in, the foundation of her future, could be taken away? The thought was dangerous, potent. It sparked a cold fire in my gut. I stopped sleeping almost entirely. My mind was a relentless engine, churning through the evidence, calculating the next move. I wasn't just reacting anymore. I was planning. I spent hours researching medical licensing boards. Their rules, their ethical guidelines, the procedures for complaints. It was tedious, dense reading, full of jargon and regulations. But I was driven by a singular purpose. He had used his professional success, built in part on the stability our marriage provided, or the stability he pretended it provided, to fund his mistress's entry into a respected profession. A profession built on trust and ethics. A profession where lying, deception, and profiting from illicit relationships could have consequences. I found the section on professional conduct, on financial impropriety, on relationships that could compromise professional standing. It was a long shot, maybe. Filing a complaint against a newly licensed doctor, alleging unethical conduct related to her relationship with a married man who funded her education. But the funding angle was key. It wasn't just an affair. It was a financial arrangement, a transaction wrapped in deceit. It was about her benefiting directly, materially, from the destruction of a marriage, funded by the assets of that marriage. Was that ethical? Could a medical board see that as compromising? I consulted a lawyer specializing in family law, but also with experience in professional ethics. He was initially skeptical. "Affairs are common, unfortunately," he said, leaning back in his chair, sighing. "And funding someone, it's murky. It's not directly related to her medical practice," but I pressed him. I showed him the sheer volume of the transfers, the duration, the fact that it wasn't just tuition but living expenses, even the apartment. I showed him the dates, coinciding precisely with her time in medical school and residency. I argued that accepting such significant financial support from a married man, knowing he was married, which Elena's report confirmed she did, through texts exchanged between them, while he was simultaneously deceiving his wife and using marital funds, demonstrated a profound lack of ethical judgment and potentially constituted receiving stolen or fraudulently obtained funds, depending on how aggressively I pursued the divorce and financial claims. It showed a willingness to profit from deceit and harm. Was that compatible with the ethical standards of a medical doctor? The lawyer paused. His expression shifted. He steepled his fingers, looking at the stack of documents. "Okay," he said slowly. This is more than just an affair. This is a pattern. A scheme. Funding a medical degree with assets hidden from a spouse that paints a different picture. It suggests intent. And her accepting it, knowing the circumstances, it raises questions about her own integrity, her judgment. Especially for someone entering a profession built on trust, he agreed to help. We drafted a formal complaint to the state medical board. It was cold, factual, devoid of emotion. Just the timeline of the relationship, the detailed financial transfers, the acquisition of assets, the evidence of his deception, and her apparent knowledge of his marital status. It laid out the case. This wasn't just a personal relationship. It was a financial arrangement that facilitated her career advancement at the direct expense of his wife and their marriage, raising serious questions about her ethical fitness to practice medicine. Filing that complaint was the turning point. It was me stepping out of the role of passive victim and into something else entirely. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was fighting back. Not just for the money or the principle, but for the sheer, brutal satisfaction of seeing consequences rain down on the people who had so casually dismantled my life. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was overlaid with a steely resolve. I was no longer paralyzed. I was moving forward, step by calculated step, towards a confrontation I knew would be explosive. I hadn't told my husband any of this. I was still playing the part of the unsuspecting wife, gathering strength, building my case, laying the trap. The silence between us felt heavy, filled with unspoken accusations on my side and his oblivious self-satisfaction on his. He thought he was in the clear. He thought he had gotten away with it. He had no idea the storm that was brewing, the one I was meticulously orchestrating. He was about to be blindsided. Completely. By the wife he had underestimated. By the woman he had betrayed. The air grew heavy with anticipation. The waiting was the hardest part. After filing the complaint, there was a period of silence. Weeks turned into months. The medical board was investigating. They were reviewing the evidence. They were interviewing people. My lawyer kept me updated, but there was little to do but wait. Meanwhile, I was also preparing for the inevitable divorce. Gathering more financial records, working with Elena to trace every hidden asset, every penny diverted. The sheer amount of money involved was staggering. It wasn't just her tuition, it was living expenses, travel, gifts, the apartment. He had poured a fortune into her life while telling me we needed to be careful with our spending. The bitterness was a constant taste in my mouth. During this time, my husband seemed relaxed. He was still having his business trips, still taking late calls, but there was a smugness about him. Like he had navigated a difficult period and come out on top. He talked about future investments, about consolidating funds. He even suggested we start looking at retirement options, blissfully unaware that the future he was discussing was crumbling around him. He was walking on eggshells, but he didn't know it. He thought he was walking on solid ground. His ignorance was almost pitiable. Almost. But the memory of the photos, the transfers, the years of lies, hardened my heart. He deserved whatever was coming to him. She deserved it too. They had built their happiness on my devastation. Now, I was the architect of their undoing. I felt like I was living a double life. The calm, composed wife at home, and the relentless investigator, the meticulous planner, the woman scorned, operating in the shadows. The emotional toll was immense. Some days, the grief would wash over me in waves, leaving me gasping for air. The loss of the marriage, the loss of the future I thought I had, the shattering of my fundamental trust in the person I had built my life with, it was a profound, irreversible trauma. Other days, the anger fueled me, a cold, hard energy that propelled me forward. I wouldn't just survive this. I would emerge stronger. I would make them face the consequences. The plot twist wasn't just about exposing him. It was about using his own actions, his own carefully constructed deceit, against him and against her. He had invested heavily in her career. He had spent years funding her dream. What if that investment was worthless? What if the very thing he had given her, the foundation of her future, was taken away? The thought was intoxicating. It was the ultimate turning of the tables. He used our life to build hers. I would use his actions to dismantle hers. It felt like poetic justice. Cruel, perhaps, but fitting. He had weaponized our resources against me. I would weaponize his betrayal against them both. The wait continued. The silence from the medical board was unnerving, but my lawyer assured me it meant they were taking it seriously. Complex investigations took time. They were verifying the financial records, subpoenaing information, interviewing witnesses. The net was tightening, even if I couldn't see it happening. I could only trust the process and continue gathering evidence for the divorce, preparing for the inevitable fallout when the truth finally exploded. My husband remained oblivious. He was whistling in the dark, convinced he was safe, while I held the match that would ignite the tinderbox he had created. The tension in the house was thick, even if he didn't sense it. I felt like a coiled spring, ready to snap, waiting for the precise moment to release the stored energy of years of betrayal. The moment was coming. I could feel it, like a storm on the horizon. The storm broke on a Tuesday. A certified letter arrived from the state medical board. I was shaking as I opened it, my lawyer on the phone. The letter was formal, official, stating the findings of their investigation. It was long, detailed. My eyes scanned the pages, adrenaline surging. They had found evidence of significant financial transfers from my husband during the period of her medical education and residency. They had found evidence that she was aware he was married and that the funds were substantial enough to raise concerns about her financial dependence and potential ethical compromise. They concluded that her actions, in accepting such substantial, undisclosed financial support from a married man, knowing he was using funds derived from his marital estate without his wife's knowledge or consent, demonstrated a lack of judgment and integrity incompatible with the ethical standards required for the practice of medicine. My breath hitched. And then I read the final paragraph. Based on their findings, the board had voted. Her medical license was being revoked. Immediately. For a minimum of 5 years. Pending review. Revoked. The word vibrated in the air. All that money. All those years of study, of sacrifice, of building a career.
Gone.
Taken away by the very system designed to uphold the integrity of the profession she sought to join. His investment. His secret funding. The foundation of the life he was building for her. Crumbling. Not because I had confronted him, not because I had pleaded or begged, but because I had exposed the truth, and the truth had consequences she couldn't evade. The satisfaction was cold, pure, and absolute. It wasn't revenge in the heat of the moment. It was justice delivered through the system. It was seeing his carefully constructed world for her collapse. My lawyer was speaking, explaining the appeals process, unlikely to succeed, he said, given the board's strong language and the evidence, the implications for her future career. But I was barely listening. My mind was focused on one thing, telling my husband, showing him the consequences of his actions. The husband arrived home later that evening, whistling cheerfully. He found me in the living room, sitting on the couch, the letter from the medical board spread on the coffee table in front of me. My face was calm, devoid of emotion. I had practiced this moment in my head 1,000 times. He saw the letter, saw the official seal, and his smile faltered. "What's this?" he asked, his voice casual, but with a hint of unease. He picked it up, his eyes scanning the first page. The color drained from his face. His hand trembled, rustling the paper. He kept reading, his breathing growing ragged. The whistling was gone. The casual air evaporated. He got to the part about the financial transfers, about her knowledge, about the ethical violations. And then, the revocation. The words seemed to leap off the page, a death sentence to his secret hopes. He looked up at me, his eyes wide with disbelief, then horror.
What?
"What is this?" he stammered. I said nothing. I just watched him, my gaze steady, unwavering. He looked back at the letter, then at me, his mind clearly racing, trying to understand how this had happened. How his secret was not only out, but had caused this. "Did you?" he started, his voice barely a whisper. "Did you do this?" I nodded, slowly. "Every penny you spent on her," I said, my voice low and clear, "was money taken from our life. Money you lied to me about. Money you used to build a future with someone else." I just
Pointed it out. To the people who care about ethics.
about integrity, and then he screamed. It wasn't a shout of anger or a cry of pain. It was a raw, guttural sound of pure, unadulterated anguish and shock. A sound ripped from the deepest part of him, where his carefully guarded secrets and hopes resided. He screamed her name. He screamed about the money. He screamed about her career ruined. He screamed about how could I be so cruel? He raged, he paced, he threw things, not at me, but near me, against the wall, shattering a vase that had been a wedding gift. His face was contorted, red, veins bulging on his neck. He accused me of being vindictive, of being heartless, of ruining her life out of jealousy.
He blamed me.
He didn't see his own actions as the cause. He saw me, the wife he had betrayed for years, as the villain for exposing his deceit and ensuring consequences. His reaction was a twisted validation. He wasn't screaming because he was caught cheating. He was screaming because his investment was lost. Because his carefully constructed alternate reality had been demolished. Because the woman he had poured his fortune and his future into was stripped of the very thing he had bought for her.
He was blindsided. Completely.
He thought he had the power, the control, the secrecy. He thought he could play God with people's lives, taking from one mine, to give to another, hers, with impunity. He never anticipated that the victim would turn the tables so decisively, so methodically, using the system he thought he was above. He never anticipated that his greatest investment would be his undoing. His screaming filled the house, a terrifying symphony of a man watching his secret world crumble around him. And all I felt was a cold, quiet satisfaction. The house, once my sanctuary, then my cage, now felt different. Lighter, perhaps. The weight of his lies was lifting. The storm I had orchestrated had hit. And he was standing in the wreckage, screaming at the sky. The screaming eventually stopped. Exhaustion, maybe. Or the dawning realization that his rage changed nothing. The letter was real. Her license was gone. His carefully built secret life was exposed, not just to me, but potentially to the world, certainly to her and anyone connected to the medical board's decision. The silence that followed was heavy, thick with the debris of shattered illusions. He sat in a chair, head in his hands, a broken man. Not broken by remorse for betraying me, I suspected, but broken by the magnitude of his loss. The loss of his investment. The loss of her future, which he had so heavily invested in. The loss of his control. I didn't feel victorious. Not in a triumphant way. The satisfaction was cold, hard, edged with sorrow. This wasn't a win that brought joy. It brought a grim sense of justice, a settling of accounts. But the cost had been immense. My marriage was over, not just because of his infidelity, but because of the fundamental dishonesty that had permeated our life for years. The man I thought I knew was a stranger. The future I thought we had was a fantasy. The aftermath wasn't a clean slate. It was navigating the ruins. The divorce was messy, as expected, but the evidence I had gathered, particularly the financial trail and the medical board's findings, put me in a strong position. He fought, of course, trying to protect his assets, trying to minimize what he had done. But the proof was undeniable. The story of the funded mistress, the secret life, the revoked license, it was a powerful narrative, and it worked against him in every negotiation. He lost more than just his mistress's career. He lost a significant portion of the wealth he had worked so hard to accumulate, much of which had been intended for his secret life. She, I heard through legal channels, was devastated. Her career prospects were in ruins. The future he had promised her, the one he had paid for with my money, was gone. I didn't revel in her misfortune, but I felt no pity either. She had knowingly participated in the destruction of my life, profiting from his deceit. She had built her dreams on a foundation of lies, and like any structure built on sand, it had collapsed. The emotional closure didn't come quickly. It was a slow, painful process. The trauma of the betrayal, the years of living a lie, the shock of his capacity for deceit, it left scars. But with the legal proceedings finalized, with the truth exposed, with the consequences delivered, a sense of peace, fragile but real, began to settle. I had faced the worst, and I had survived. More than survived. I had fought back, intelligently, strategically, and I had won in a way that mattered. Not just financially, but morally. I had refused to be a passive victim. I had reclaimed my agency. I had shown him, and her, that actions have consequences, even when hidden. The house was mine now. It felt different. Quieter. Emptier in some ways, but also cleaner. The air no longer felt thick with lies. I started to rebuild my life, not from scratch, but from the solid ground I had fought to reclaim. The trust was broken, perhaps irrevocably when it came to romantic relationships, but my trust in myself, in my ability to handle adversity, to see things clearly, to fight for what was right, that trust was stronger than ever. The dry humor returned, less as a shield and more as a way to process the sheer absurdity of what I had lived through. You can't make this stuff up, I'd think, shaking my head. My story wasn't a tidy package with a perfectly happy ending. It was messy, painful, and the victory was bittersweet. I had lost a marriage, a decade of my life, an idealized future. But I had gained something invaluable: the knowledge of my own strength, the clarity to see deceit, and the quiet satisfaction of having stood up for myself and delivered justice, not with screaming or violence, but with meticulous patience and undeniable truth. He had wanted to give her the world, using my resources. I had ensured that the world he built for her crumbled. It wasn't about revenge. It was about setting the balance right. About ensuring that the costs of his actions were borne not just by me, but by them too. It was about saying, in the clearest possible terms, that you cannot build your happiness on the ruins of someone else's life without consequence. And sometimes, the paper trail you leave behind is more powerful than any emotion, any lie, any carefully constructed facade. It was over. The storm had passed, and I was still standing. If this story hit close to home, I'd love to hear your version. Drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is. Thanks for being here. Subscribing helps bring more of these to life.